A 4-day ceasefire has commenced in Gaza after nearly 7 weeks of war, with Israel agreeing to pause the war temporarily. The deal includes release of 50 Israeli hostages and 150 Palestinians in the first batch. The deal also allows for the entry of more humanitarian convoys and relief aid into the Gaza Strip. Trucks carrying aid have begun entering Gaza via the Egyptian border, but this doesn't mean that the war is over. Israel's defense minister has vowed to continue the fight forcefully after the brief truce, saying he expects at least 2 more months of battle. So what will it take for Israel to stop its offensive in Gaza, and if the war continues for 2 more months? What does it mean for the people of Gaza who have no houses, no medical facilities and no essential supplies? To take this discussion forward, we are now joined by Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, spokesperson of the Israel Defense Forces, and former diplomat KC Singh. Lieutenant Colonel Lerner, let me begin by asking you about the arrangements that the IDF has made for the hostages who are going to be released by Hamas.
Thank you indeed. And as we look, it's supposed to be happening as we speak in these minutes. We are waiting for the announcement that hostages have been released. Who the hostages are, what are their ages, the women, the children that we are expecting to arrive back in Israel. This is the process. Indeed, we have completed our preparations, which include transport, but also medical services, initial medical services, and support of the individuals, of the people, of the women and children that are arriving or expected to arrive as we speak throughout the show. We will then hand them off to professional medical services in Israel, and this is the initial process. In the meantime, we will be continuing to hold our positions in northern Gaza Strip in defensive capabilities, but very strong defensive capabilities in case of any hostilities against us.
Right. I would also like to ask you, what happens after this ceasefire is concluded? What about release of more hostages? What are the terms that Israel would be agreeable to?
So, of course, these deliberations are taking place on the political level and on the diplomatic level, and less to do with the IDF. But I can say what has been stated in the agreement, that for every 10 hostages released, another day of ceasefire, of holding the fire, will continue. So from our perspective, one of our war goals was to return and bring home all of the hostages. It can be done through diplomacy. It can be done through military force. We are certain that it is only a result of the pressure that Hamas were under because of our military efforts that we are actually where we are today in an initial release of hostages being held by Hamas. The reality is one where our offensive activities will resume once the hostages are brought home. We have 2 goals of this war. First of all, to bring the hostages home, but second of all, to make sure Hamas never have the power of government ever again to undermine, jeopardize, threat, abduct, murder, massacre Israelis ever again. This is basically why we are at war. The paradigm change has to be completed.
Right. I'll request you stay on with us, Lieutenant Colonel Lerner. Let me bring in Ambassador KC Singh, former Indian diplomat. Ambassador KC Singh, how do you think Qatar and US were able to bring about this truce? And do you think following this, there could be a conclusion of the war as well? Do you see that happening, Ambassador KC Singh?
No, let's be very clear. Firstly, it's not ceasefire, it's only a pause, as the Colonel explained. So it's only a humanitarian pause, which is what has been agreed upon. And the conditions are very clear, because it's for 4 days, 50 hostages to be released, and that's what Hamas are doing. They're releasing 1/4 of those hostages today, that is 13. And they'll do it over the next, hopefully do it over the next 4 days. And as Colonel explained, if Israel says another 10 will buy another day, it remains to be seen whether Hamas will play that game and release them. And the other interesting thing is that there are no Americans in this. So Hamas obviously are keeping the Americans back, realizing that if you release the Americans, then the American pressure on Israel ceases. And they don't want that to happen. Now, the problem is that the objective is really, Colonel's absolutely right. One of the objectives was to get the hostages back. But the other main strategic objective was to destroy Hamas. Now, a lot of the infrastructure has been destroyed, but it's mainly in northern Gaza. Now, what happens after they have finished the operations here? People have shifted, almost 1.7 million people have shifted to southern Gaza. And I'm sure some of the Hamas leaders have shifted there because the tunnels must be connecting north to south. Now, if Israel starts going there, where do those people go from there? So obviously, there has to be some clarity in the coming days and months where I'm sure Israel knows that they can't possibly be conducting the same kind of operation in the south, because then you'll be really wanting those people to go into Gaza, which is what Egypt doesn't want and those people don't want. So I think it's still a gray area where Israel will keep their stated objectives in the open. But in the meanwhile, as the pause continues, the pressure will build up, international pressure, that please continue and try turning it into a ceasefire and see how a transition can be worked out, because there has to be an end game of what happens in Gaza and who runs Gaza, because I don't think Israel can or would like to run it indefinitely.
Right. Colonel Lerner, I'd also like to ask you about some reports. The Defense Minister of Israel has been quoted by The Guardian saying that this war will continue, of course, for at least 2 months. Is that timeline you are working with, the Israeli forces are working with?
So our goal is to change the security regime in the Gaza Strip so that there is no longer a threat against Israelis. Indeed, as the minister pointed out, there is a 2-month framework. But I would say from the military's perspective, we've not received a time limit. There is no due date for this war effort, only a strategic goal that needs to be changed. So I would say we have to be very, very strong. And I agree with the ambassador exactly what he says. We have to keep our eyes on the ball and be very, very cautious with regard to the humanitarian situation. That is why, indeed, we have increased the amount of trucks and humanitarian assistance going into Gaza. And today, over 200 trucks are expected to be brought in with medical supplies, food supplies, shelter, fuel, and cooking gas in order to alleviate some of the difficulties. It's been, from the outset, we've been saying very, very clearly, the people of Gaza are not the enemy of Israel. It is Hamas that are the enemy of Israel. And I would say Hamas, in its extreme exploitation of the civilian arena, are also the enemy of the people of Gaza. I think it would benefit everybody that Hamas ceases to control the Gaza Strip. Hamas ceases to exist as a governing authority in the Gaza Strip. Hamas ceases to have the powers of government to build a terrorist army that infiltrates into Israel, to build a capability, an aerial capability to launch bombs from drones and suicide drones, and indeed to utilize the civilian arena, such as hospitals and other protected locations that they have done over the last 16 years of their government in an extreme abuse of any humanitarian, I would say basic human norms. We expect that the international humanitarian organizations, but also the international community as a whole, and I would say the WHO should be leading the parade or the charge on this issue. The World Health Organization, till date, 7 weeks into this war, have yet to say any word, any comment about Hamas's abuse of hospitals. This is an issue of dire concern because in putting its terrorist infrastructure beneath hospitals, they are putting all of the people in Gaza, all of the most, I would say, most vulnerable people in Gaza at risk. We are fighting a merciless organization, a merciless military, a merciless entity that has no regard for human life, Israeli or Palestinian.
Right. Ambassador KC Singh, coming to you, when it comes to the larger challenges of this becoming a larger regional conflict, where are we with that challenge? Do you think that challenge still remains in a big way?
Well, so far, Hezbollah has been only, inflicting pinpricks at the northern border of Israel. But the naval presence of the American fleet has acted as a deterrent. They have not really boldly tried to enter or come with any great force and start a confrontation because they know the cost will be heavy for them. That is why it's important that if the pause is extended, then Hezbollah's will should not be tested. Because if it goes beyond a certain limit, you don't know. They may take a choice. I'm sure The Iranians are also keeping an eye on it, also consulting with them. But at some particular point, if the Arab public opinion, if the Arab street starts putting pressure, then Hezbollah may also be forced to invade, though so far they have only symbolically fired some missiles and Israel has retaliated, but it's not been a really calculated attack on the northern frontier of Israel to distract the Israeli army. But one thing is important, you asking me the role of Qatar, the head of the political organization, Mr. Hania, he is based in Qatar. And there were reports that the military head of the military wing, was based in Hamas. And what happened, the attack on October 7, may have been engineered by the military wing without really the political wing having full control over it or having a say in it. So they might have been vetoed and the decision was taken in Hamas. So the political wing is very much there. But if this pause has been accepted, that means the political wing is getting some traction back. And that is a good sign because it remains to be seen how much they can control. They can exercise control over the Hamas, which is in existence, because Israel needs also to show to their own people that their objectives are achieved. And they won't be achieved if there is no clarity on who's going to be running Hamas and whether the people who are running the military operation from Hamas in Gaza have been decapitated or not decapitated. So there is a window of opportunity. It's very narrow as yet. But it's always good to have a pause, always good to start with prisoners being exchanged and hostages being handed back. And as the colonel said, if it's 10 prisoners and 1 day, there are almost 200 prisoners will be left after 4 days. So we are looking at 20 days. If this can carry on, I don't think Hamas will work to hand over all the prisoners unless they know there are guarantees that there'll be an end to the war. Because they think that those hostages
that was
also
what
giving them some
they
protection.
will now be working towards. I guess that's where the negotiations will now shift. My final question to Colonel Lerner. Colonel Lerner, very quickly, there have been reports today how there was an Israeli battalion. There were women officers there, sentries on duty, who had observed training by Hamas terrorists, how they were seeing that there were training camps, there were training of taking hostages going on the other side of the border. They had also sent these communications to their high-ups in the intelligence establishment. How would you react to these reports?
Yeah, thank you. First, I'd like to comment on what KC Singh was saying about Hezbollah. Hezbollah, over the last 7 weeks, has escalated the situation almost every day with several rockets, anti-tank guided missiles, sniper fire, machine gun fire. We've been very defensive on our border with Lebanon, taking up defensive positions and making sure that we do not get dragged into another front with Hezbollah in the north. We've evacuated almost all of the people that live in a 5-kilometer radius from the border, including from the town of Kiryat Shmona. Our defensive posture has actually defined the current staging ground for that battle. We are responding every single time that Hezbollah are attacking us, but it is a defensive posture nevertheless. Regarding your question, indeed, there are severe questions that need to be asked in the aftermath of this war, but they will be asked after the war. We are looking into it. We will investigate ourselves, and those that need to be held accountable will be held accountable. It is a very serious failure of our system, obviously, and if these claims are accurate, then there is also responsibility that needs to be taken for this. The situation is today we are focused on the war fighting. There will be time for an investigation.
All right, there will be time for investigation after the war comes to an end. Thanks for joining us, Colonel Lerner and Ambassador KC Singh. We've run out of time. We are taking a short break, but up next, a Qatar court has accepted an appeal filed by the Indian government against the death penalty granted to 8 former Indian Navy personnel. A discussion when we are back. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. A Qatar court has accepted an appeal filed by the Indian government against the death penalty granted to 8 former Indian Navy personnel. Sources have told CNBC that the matter will be heard soon. Joining us right now to speak about the importance of this development is Ambassador KP Fabian, who has been our ambassador to Qatar in the past. Ambassador Fabian, let me ask you, is this a positive step in the direction of legal relief for our Navy personnel, our former Navy personnel?
Well, I have always maintained right from the start that it is most unlikely that they will be executed, because the young Amir, he is 44 or 45, you can check it, is very progressive, and there is no question of his permitting execution of 8 Indians. But at the same time, India has to make it possible for him to exercise his pardon, and the pardon can be exercised only after the legal process is completed. So we have done the right thing in going to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal either may revoke the death sentence but give either life sentence or X years of imprisonment, in which case we can, of course, avail of the treaty that we have with Qatar, that nationals of either country can undergo the sentence in their own country. But in case the Court of Appeal doesn't give revocation, then it will be necessary for us to ask for pardon. And it is quite possible that our Ministry of External Affairs has already taken the necessary action for that. But, these are things they cannot talk about freely.
Right. Ambassador Fabian, my final question. This is a very, very sensitive case. The External Affairs Minister even met the families of the sailors who are in a jail in Qatar. Do you think, considering the sensitivity around this issue, our Navy personnel would be properly taken care of, their human rights respected wherever they are? And at what stage would India probably take this up at the highest level?
Let me put it this way. I personally think, and I could be wrong, because being no longer in the government, I am not privy to all the information. Were I in the External Affairs Ministry, I would have, on that day when this came out, summoned the Qatari ambassador, not in a harsh way, summoned him cordially, just to tell him of the importance we attach to this matter. And secondly, please listen to me very carefully. The External Affairs Minister should have spoken to his counterpart in Qatar and, if necessary, gone there. Now, these two things, it seems, have not happened. But nevertheless, I think we have to proceed in the right way. And the right way is, exhausting the legal options and then asking for pardon.
Right. Ambassador Fabian, thank you so much for joining us, telling us the road ahead for our Navy personnel, our former Navy personnel who have been arrested. They have been in a Qatari jail for the last 1 year, and their families are now hoping for their pardon, for their release as well. Let's shift focus now. Swedish Minister for Financial Markets, Niklas Wykman, visited India to hold talks with Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on potential areas of collaboration between the two countries. To discuss more